All right, so here we are on the right angle cross of Eden 3-5 profile. Think about the cross of Eden in the third variation. This is the only really archetypal Eden variation. They weren't sent out of Eden alone. Adam and Eve together, both of them punished, both of them sent out. And you have to see that when you're looking at the cross of Eden, you're looking at the most dualistic of all dualistic configuration in this very, very dualistic quarter. And you have the joy of a third line go out and multiply and make mistake along the way. How many children are called a mistake? My father told me I was one. I don't know if it was truth or vengeance, but I certainly wasn't planned. Let's put it that way. He was 50, so it wasn't planned. There's always mistakes, and the mistakes that are great. Genetically, the genes love the third line best. Genes love the third line. The third line will have a child with anything. If it could do a cross species, it would. Anything. And if it weren't for the third line, we would not have the development of the species. We would not have the quality of the gene pool we have. We would not have all of this evolutionary development because it's only the third line that is willing to make the big mistake. Not only do you end up flying beside something that is different, it's really different genetic pool, entirely, all of these things. It's the extremist line. You also notice something about the six. Every single line has a blue lead. It's all about learning. It's all about growing through the process of developing these things. And of course, the moment that you see that you realize that lines that have this kind of structure, that they're deeply susceptible, that do not self negative conditioning, because so much of the way the line is going to be depend on how it becomes that process to the nurturing. There are two sides of this. It says allegiance, the ability to secure support and create strength out of a weak position, and when connected to the harmonic gate 59, mating that results in conception. Think about the third line. It's the only line that says if you hook up with a 59, you can really produce. In other words, this is the most fertile. It has to be in a way. If you think about the six opening up, it actually opens up to a generic type. That's why when you see people with multiple partners over years, you see that they basically hook up with the same people. And the one thing you can see is that when you're dealing with the one or the two, there's a very narrow area of selection. But when you get to a three, when it opens up to take in anything. It's able to be fertile with enormous level of quality of the other. It's destruction of old form through union, either mundane as above sexual union or exalted as universalization. The depth of feeling that enrich union and intimacy. It is also, by the way, sensitivity to controls that lead to the ending of intimacy. It's one of the things to understand about the third line is that the third line is intended to break bonds. I mentioned that you do the other day, aroma, and the fact that this idea that it's woman that clings to men is such a joke. And you can see that there in the third line. The real tragedy for the yin is that the yin realizes something that unfortunately it can't just get rid of that yang. It has to keep them along long enough because unfortunately the offspring take a very long time to be independent. The natural tendency in the yin is to say thank you very much, it was a nice genetic contribution, bye now. So obviously when you're dealing with the six and you're dealing with the third line cross of Eden, you know that you've thrown out there and you have to do it. And of course, what's going to happen to these pieces is that for them, duality is basically a revolving door. And as a revolving door, it can be successful or not. And remember, it's a 3-5 structure, which is very difficult. There are all these very powerful fifth line seduction. There's the belief that allegiance here is possible, that you can find a way to be with the other, that you can destroy the old forms so that something new can emerge. And of course, you end up with a third line personality that makes a mistake in the selection in the first place because it's not operating correctly, and that the whole damn thing is emotional. And you end up in a situation where you conceive under circumstances that are conditioned by the emotional wave and not by truth. And that brings us to the business of selection. It is obvious that the emotional system could never provide anything but clarity. It can never provide an absolute. There is no absolute in relationship. It's not possible. There's no way to be really absolutely clear about the other. It's what emotions teach us. And so it's essential that the only way in which allegiance can actually be established that's healthy is that you have emotional awareness that is operating correctly. There's nothing else. Then we go to the 3-6. The 3-6 here either end up being the kind of people that have very, very large families or end up preferring the kids of relationships where they may have a lifelong girlfriend or boyfriend that they always have a separate place. They're never really together. But in that way, they do end up developing what is classic. I remind people that have third line teams how important it is to break the bond with your partner all the time. In other words, have your own bedroom, be able to break out of the aura and get into your own aura and be able to meet them again. And in that way, you can revitalize your relationship and you don't have to turn it into bonds that are made to broken. And it's the end of the sentence. It's bond made and broken, bonds made and broken, bonds made and broken. It goes on and on and on. And in that way, you can maintain relationships for a long time. The whole thing about this kind of relationship, the 3-6 relationship, is that children often make it much more difficult for them. They can actually find a way to find allegiance through being able to be together but separate. My partner and I have always over the years had houses where we were on the same property, different places, and we always done that. She's a third line, I have a third line mind, and she's a third line in terms of intimacy. And it sometimes that works. You have your own space and you keep on coming back. And in keeping coming back, you rejuvenate that process every time. So make sure you can break the bonds and the breaking and the bonds.